Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. But as always, with that nostalgic twist where we walk down memory lane together, hand in hand, which is probably more important now than it's ever been. I'm delighted to say I'm joined once again by my co-host, Paul. Paul, how are you doing? Great to see you once again.
Great to see you as always, Nick. I'm doing very well. Very excited to get stuck into this episode. It's one that I think listeners will find fascinating.
Yes, and fascinating is definitely the word I would use for this episode as well, because it's not really something that we get to talk about too much, especially from a nostalgia perspective. This is more of a historical perspective. And I'm delighted to say we're being joined by the wonderful Chris Lee, who, if you're watching on YouTube, is just sat below us here. He is the author of some of the fantastic books such as Origin Stories, The Defiant, which we'll discuss today, and also Shades of Green, A Journey into Irish Football. Welcome to our El Partido, Chris Lee.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Mucho gusto. Very much looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So do you know a bit about sort of like what we like to talk about here in El Partido? We're very nostalgia based. So do you like a bit of football nostalgia?
Yeah, of course. I live football nostalgia and lived in Spain in the 90s in the pre-Galactico era, which I'll probably touch on at some point because I used to be able to sit for £10, 2,000 pesetas, and stand at the Bernabeu for 1,000 pesetas, so fiver. So it's I'm very nostalgic about mid 90s. So, you know, 10 of the century will win a bit different. I think got more commercial, a lot more expensive, less accessible. But so that's why I yearn for the 90s.
Yeah, and it was such a good time as well. Peak 90s is where I think our heart belongs as well, isn't it, Paul? But I was going to ask you, Chris, about your time in Spain, actually, because obviously you've got a background that probably not a lot of people have in terms of, relevance to Spanish football as it hit its stride, as it hit its boom. So, how did you end up in Spain and ultimately, producing all these fantastic books and having a great touch on Spanish football culture?
Yeah, so by day I work in sort of technology marketing, so it's nothing to do with football at all. So it's always been a bit of an escape for me. But I did my dissertation way back, as I mentioned it. I was doing a European Studies degree, so I got a year out in Madrid. So that was great. That's 96, 97 season. And this was, like I said, pre-Galactico. I lived 10 minutes walk from the Bernabeu Stadium. So I get to do things like 10 p.m. kickoffs with 98,000 crowds, with the odd bit of a crowd trouble thrown in, which is always exciting. But it's great if you've ever gone up the Paseo de Castellana and all the other places up near there when match day is. It's just a totally different experience what I'd be used to, which is like cars being parked 4 lanes across, as you know, at that time of night. And, it's just an absolutely phenomenal experience. And my first goal, I was absolutely spoiled. The first goal at my end was a Roberto Carlos free kick against Celta de Vigo. So, I've seen one of them live. I can say that, absolutely. I spent some time in Valencia a few years later. And then, but while I was at university, I did my dissertation on regional identity in Spain as expressed through football, a case study of Real Madrid and Barcelona. And this was before there was anything really in English about it. Simon Cooper's Football Against the Enemy, which I'm sure a lot of people have read, had one chapter on El Clásico. But there wasn't really anything else. I had to speak to local journalists, speak to people. And it's a really interesting time to be there because it was only 20 years after Franco had died in the 75, transitioned to democracy, joined the European Community, which is now the European Union, in 1986. And so even visibly in the streets of Madrid, you could still see the odd abuela, like an old lady with black, dressed in black, like a classic sort of like back in the day widow type thing. But also you could see the transition of Spain as a country into modern democracy and the demographic and the height of the people. So you've got the grandparents really short, their kids slightly taller, and then their kids taller than that. And it was really fascinating because that was that crossover when they were getting better diets, better job opportunities,
you know,
just turning into a modern democracy that it is today, really.
Yeah, it's a fascinating period, especially that sort of 20 to 25 years after Franco's death. And we're going to touch about, in this episode on the Spanish Civil War and football during it, and obviously football during the Francoism era as well. Just to know a bit more about yourself, Paul, you very much pointed Chris in my direction beforehand, and the outside right, and what an absolutely fantastic you know presence that you have, and all the output in terms of with your books and your work. As you said, I didn't know this wasn't your full-time job, if I'm being perfectly honest. It certainly feels like it. It's such a high quality, isn't it, Paul?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Chris, I'd mentioned to you in the messages we exchanged, I'm a big fan of the Defiant and obviously Shades of Green as well. I think it's fantastic. I must admit, I've actually read origin stories, which I don't know how I've not done that yet, but it's certainly on my to-do list. I've been a follower of Outside Right for a long time. So,
oh, thank you very much. Appreciate the words. And just on origin stories, that's for anyone who's not in, it's not as self-explanatory as the other two, but it's about how the game got started in every single country. So there's a big chapter on Spain, as you can imagine. But it's quite late in the book because Spain came relatively late to football.
Yeah, they do, and obviously professional football-wise isn't until I think it was in 1927. I want to say I pick. You may be able to correct me there, Chris.
29 Liga
29.
starts.
That's one.
And it was Unai Emery's grandfather, was it, that conceded the first goal? I think
that was for Real Union, wasn't it? If I remember rightly.
That's right. Yeah, against Espanyol. So yeah, but they didn't even play a full international till the 1920 Olympics, and then randomly, actually. Went and won silver because I think it was the Czechs that played the Belgians in the final, had a bit of a hissy fit about a penalty that was awarded to Belgium, who obviously the hosts, and stormed off the pitch. They had to rerun effectively a silver and bronze playoff, which Spain had qualified for. So, and they beat the Netherlands, I think it was, to win silver. So that's their first piece of silverware from their very first outing as an international outfit. So, yeah, interesting stories.
Yeah, it always seems quite natural, does football, to the Spanish, and it almost makes me very jealous, especially being based in the northwest of England, where there are a lot of successful football teams, but the one I support maybe not so much. But which is Blackpool, Chris. I don't know how you feel about
that. one-time FA Cup winner, right?
Yeah, back in 1953, the famous Stanley Matthews final. So I could talk about that all day, but we've got more important things to discuss with yourself. Let's go to football during the Spanish Civil War to begin with, because you've just alluded to the fact that Spain came to football, especially professionally, quite late, 1929. Only a few years later, Spain sort of descends into chaos in between, the Republican left and the nationalist right. I want you to sort of set the scene for us, if that's okay, Chris, because we're going to talk about C. Jupiter, but if there's a bit of background to this beforehand, isn't there?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. Spain's like as any of your listeners know, it's a very strange country in that it's held together 17 autonomous regions, right? And you think in the UK it's hard enough keeping kind of 4 entities happy. Imagine 17, right? Especially we've got different languages. You've got Basque, which is the oldest language in Europe, and totally unconquered by the Romans even, and things like that. So, but Spain comes the world's first global superpower in many ways in the 15th, 16th century, along with Portugal. They're kind of seafaring and literally split the world up. The Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494, and that's why Portugal end up in Brazil, and Spain end up taking over a lot of the rest of Latin America and other places like the Philippines. But 19th century, due to mismanagement and revolutions and things like that, it all comes crashing down. And by the time we're in sort of 1898, I think the final defeat to the United States in Cuba, they lose Cuba, and the fleet comes limping back into the port of El Ferrol in Galicia in the northwest Spain. And it's seen by a young Francisco Franco, who has ambitions of joining the Navy at this point. And so it sticks in his mind, and it does come back. And I've always said about Spain that you can chart its history, its turbulent 20th century, through the names of its cup competition. So if you think about it, starts with the Copa de la Coronación, so that's the Coronation Cup, and that's the coronation of Alfonso XIII. He's the guy that bestows the royal patronage on everyone. So that's Real, as everyone knows, the prefix of 21 plus clubs in Spain. Then it becomes the Copa del Rey the following year. Also won by Athletic Club, by the way. Athletic Club's pre-runner of the first one. And that's the King's Cup. And it stays that way until the Second Republic comes along, which, after the Prima de Rivera dictatorship in the 20s, which we'll allude to more in the Hupeta chapter. But then it becomes the Copa del Presidente de la República, so the President of the Republic's Cup. And then during the Spanish Civil War, the Copa España Libre comes along, which is not recognized by the RFEF as that's the Spanish FA as an official tournament. Levante won that, Levante of Valencia, and so they haven't had that recognized. But it's a really interesting story itself. Franco wins the Civil War in 1939. Spoiler alert: he runs till 1975 till his death in November. It becomes the Copa del Generalissimo. He calls himself the very big general, the Generalissimo. And then during this transition to democracy again, King Juan Carlos comes back from, the monarch is exiled. It comes back to Spain. It becomes a Copa del Rey again. It's stayed that way ever since the 70s. So you can see how just their equivalent of the FA Cup has changed names in accordance to whatever is happening. So the time we're talking about coming into the Spanish Civil War period, which is 36-39, you've got the build-up of massive social upheaval. The power is consolidated amongst the monarchy, the church, the landowners, and obviously the army is what enforces that. Obviously, there's lots of different factions, like the Unionists come up, and they're inspired by other movements around Europe, and you get various things like the tragic week in Barcelona where 100 people get killed in conflicts, which Hupeta is part of. We'll find out later on as part of these kind of various uprisings. And so, you get to the point in the 1930s, 31, where the Second Spanish Republic is announced. The king goes into exile. All the clubs of the Real prefix have to drop their Real title and so Real Madrid, for example, just becomes Madrid Club de Fútbol again. And it's important to note that football plays a part in this, actually, the announcement of the Second Spanish Republic. So if we think about who's involved in it, so there's a politician called Rafael Sánchez Guerra. He is the guy who announced the coming of the Spanish Second Republic. And everyone loves that because it means more rights for women, more equal rights for workers, more power to the regions, and obviously there's things that wind up the army, and they'll come back to bite them later on. But he ends up becoming president of Real Madrid, or Madrid, I should say. A few years later, he beats a guy called Santiago Bernabeu, a former striker for Real Madrid, in the presidential runoff in 1935. The president of FC Barcelona, who's named called Josep Sunyol, who we'll come to as well later on, he's also involved in the Catalan Republican left as well, and also in the Basque Country, a former Athletic Club player, in fact, someone who won the Copa del Rey in 1923, a guy called Jose Antonio Aguirre. He is involved with the Basque Nationalist Party, the PNV, and this is all sort of this. You see why footballers are involved with politics, frontline politics, at the time the Second Spanish Republic comes in. Cut a long story even shorter if I can. Basically, by the time 1936 comes along, the army and the landowners, and they've all had enough of this, and they've decided enough is enough. Franco is based in Morocco with the army. He launches a coup, and all hell breaks out for the next 3 years. And we will delve into how football coped with that and responded to it as we go.
Yeah, because there's quite an importance with Hupeta and football as a resistance as a whole during this period as well. Because even today you can see the parallels that still get talked about, Chris, as well. The best part of almost 50 years later, 50 years this year since Franco died, where the same fingers are still pointed at. In the Defiant, you write about Hupeta as well as a fascinating Catalan side, but it was their crest that became sort of like a bit of a political issue that really got swept up into this conversation, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hupeta, like a lot of clubs in Barcelona or Spain in general, were founded by foreigners, Scottish textile workers, funny enough, working in Barcelona. This isn't uncommon at the time. This is why, as you know, Espanyol, the second team of Barcelona, so-called Spanish, because it was a response to foreign-founded clubs such as, well, Jupiter came later, but Barcelona, for example, had been founded by Swiss and British residents. So there's a series of anarchist kind of events going on to get better rights for workers, etc., including the tragic week, as I mentioned, with 100 people shot or killed with clashes with the army reservists. And it's interesting that the legend of Jupiter emerges during this period in the 20s, because two reasons. One, their ground was used allegedly as a place to store weapons, apparently, reputedly, like, had guns and stuff hidden inside their footballs and stuff to smuggle them around. But also, secondly, they were involved in an incident with Barcelona where the national anthem was booed, and the at Les Corts, the Barcelona's own ground, and that led to Joan Camper, the founder, being made to step down by the government, the De Rivera government. But then thirdly, as you mentioned, they had the flag, which is the Catalan Senyera, which people may know as a kind of red and yellow stripes of Catalonia. That's fine on its own. That just shows Catalonia's, as a region. However, if you add a blue triangle with a star on it, what that does is evoke a separatist movement from Spain, because that's the flag of Cuba, and the flag of Puerto Rico, who people may know has that blue sort of triangle with a star in it, and that indicates that you want to break away from independence from Spain, right? So that's what they're inspired by. As we mentioned before, it wasn't that long ago at this point. So they were denounced by a judge as a clear dissimulation of the Catalan separatist flag, and they were made to change it. So it became a crown, effectively. So it became far more acceptable to the people of the time.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that because you did mention obviously the boon of the anthem, and in your book you talk about it's actually a British Royal Navy band, isn't it? That's brought in to play at halftime for halftime entertainment, which it's I don't think we get that level of halftime entertainment now, do we? Really, no. Brass band on the pitch. So
no, exactly. And they were playing La Marseillaise, so that's the national anthem of Spain. And they only got a few bars in, they were booed and jeered. So, until this day, as you people may have noticed, whenever Spain play, there are no lyrics to the Spanish national anthem. So they couldn't agree on the words, I think, post the Francoist era. So I think they've just left it wordless, literally.
Yeah, and that incident led to the resignation of the Barca president as well, didn't it? And effectively the club being shut down for the best part of 6 months, if I remember rightly. So, what does that tell us, Chris, about how politicised football had become during this era? It became a real sort of like signal of either acceptance or defiance of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where the sort of the lines in the sand are being drawn early, still 10 years away from the Civil War. But you can see that football is, despite having only been really around for 2.5 decades, 3 decades in Spain, it's now a mass spectator sport with the power of the mob. Effectively, 14,000 people booing the national anthem is not going to go unnoticed, and they can't, let it tolerated. So I guess also it's a lesson to people in Barcelona. It's like, okay, en masse, we can have this influence, and that's kind of like a culture that's stuck with them, really.
Yeah, it's never really truly gone away, has it, Paul?
No, it's not. I mean, even now, obviously, there's been issues this century with Barcelona and independence and cultural identity as well of the region. I remember going to the Camp Nou for a Champions League game. I think it was about 2014. It was, and you go down the street and there's senyeras all over the place. Many with the blue triangle and the star still visible. I think it's changed slightly in the last few years after the disturbance with the attempted referendum a few years back. I think there's perhaps more so out of a form of suppression, I guess, without wanting to get into contemporary political tensions too much. But you do see that culturally, Catalan pride is very much on show when you're in the region.
Whenever Barcelona wins a tournament, they certainly used to just say Visca Basca, Visca Catalunya, which means in Catalan, obviously, Barcelona win, Catalonia wins. And so it is obviously tied to that whole Més que un club and the more than a club thing that you get at Barcelona. It's interesting because when I lived there in the 90s, they had a shirt, sponsorless shirt. And I think they also had a core. So Pep was the holding midfielder, for example, so they had a Catalan core, and they had that until kind of recently, really, when that sort of great generation retired. A lot of the Pujol and all that sort of people. So is it, and Busquets, are they as authentic now as a Catalan thing? And, and they've obviously had the disruption of having the ground closed while they're rebuilding and moving to the Olympic Stadium, and then going back to the new camp. So it's interesting to see how it picks up from here, really.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I just had to have a little peek at the San Andreu shirt I've got behind me, because when it resonated in terms of, you were mentioning about the Jupiter badge, I was like, the colours in the San Andreu badge are very, very similar, but it doesn't have the star that you were referring to. So I just had to double check that. But again, probably that leads into that. Clubs like San Andreu, Europa, and such, they seem to be maybe picking up that core base around Barcelona, where maybe, I don't want to say FC Barcelona are losing their Catalan identity, but there seems to be a bit more of a swell of other sides that are picking up, people in their droves.
And that could be anything to do with either Catalan identity thing, but it also might just be a modern football thing. I think that's what Copa 90 just did a great documentary on Santander, so it's worth checking out. I haven't actually watched it yet, but I'm familiar with, when I was writing the Defiant, I think one of the Catalan guys I spoke to said that people are, like here, getting priced out or drifting towards lower league or non-league football, just as a cultural thing. So it's become very much football of the barrio, the neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like with Europa and Gracia as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think it's worth just to link the 2 points of discussion we've had together there, with the modern football aspect on the one hand, and the regional identity, and just to go back about Barca presidents. Obviously, you mentioned Sunyol before, and he wanted to position the club more as a vehicle for identity as well, didn't he, at the time? Which fascinating character, actually. I don't want to give too much away from the chapter of your book, but I know that we can't really move past this point without at least giving him fair commentary.
No, absolutely. And as I mentioned, he was involved with politics, off the pitch as well. So outside the club, he was a member of the Catalan Republican Left, and then he also established a left-wing newspaper called La Rambla, and so he was kind of quite active himself within politics in the region. And he's there at this time when it's all kind of kicking off in the late 20s. Barcelona was even touted as a potential venue for the Olympic Games in 1936. Obviously, they lose to Berlin because the subways just opened, I think, in 1929, about the same time as La Liga's launched. So Catalonia is really going somewhere. It's got a metro, which quite advanced for those times. And this, by the way, Berlin was selected before the Nazis rose to power in 1933. But Barcelona was due to host an alternative Olympics. I've got the T-shirt on right now. Actually, so I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if everyone's seen the poster of that. If not, it's worth looking up.
Yeah.
The Olimpiada Popular. So that was an anti-fascist Olympic Games, and that was due to kick off. I think it was on the 18th of July. It was meant to start, or something like that. But on the 17th of July, when the coup started, so actually it never happened at all. And so Barcelona didn't get to host an Olympics of any type until 1992, as we know. But Sunyol's an interesting guy. He was one of probably the first high-profile footballing casualty of the war, and that was because in the early period of the war, and the nationalists were advancing on Madrid, he happened to be in the area in his car, and he probably crossed the line. That he didn't realize he'd crossed over into the nationalist line, and he was pulled up in the car, and he and his other occupants, I think there were 3 of them, were executed there and then, really. So it wasn't because he was president of FC Barcelona. It was more, just wrong place, wrong time, really.
Yeah, which sort of demonstrates the brutality of the machine that took over during the Civil War in Spain. You hear them methodically going through town by town, making sure, well, it was nothing short of a cleanse, was it? And like you say, if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, you would either end up interned or worse. So it's a very sad story about Sunyol as well, because he was building something in Barcelona too. He
was, but I just want to make a quick point before we go into talk about the Civil War in any more greater detail, that there were atrocities committed on both sides. it's really sort of not yes, obviously there's one side that was the protagonist of it, that was the nationalists, and obviously they, as we know, had time enough to be worse, had several decades to be to do some terrible atrocities, but both sides did some really terrible things. Like you said, if anyone to read what's his name? Anthony Beaver, I think it's his book. His name is. He wrote a great book on the Spanish Civil War, and if you read it, it's absolutely brutal. But before we go into the Spanish Civil War, quick question for you both: there is two shirts currently in use in Britain at the moment by football clubs that are inspired by the Spanish Civil War. Can you name them?
Can name one? That's Newport County's. I don't know if it's their away shirt or third shirt, inspired by the Basque evacuees.
That's correct.
And the other one, Clapton Community.
Correct. Here it is. I come loaded with props today. This is the original 2018 version. So you can see that No Pasarán on the back, which was the great battle cry of La Pasionaria. She was called. She was Dolores Irabarri, who was a Basque kind of politician. She did great speeches, including one at the Mestalla, actually, in Madrid, Valencia. So, and it's got the International Brigade's colours. Icon, 3-pointed star, and then it's also got the purple, red, and yellow of the Spanish Republic, and they're still using that. It's so popular. They launched it in 2018. I guess it's the 2018 version. They've changed, design since, but it's still being used as an away shirt. So, a bit of an iconic one there.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you had that up your sleeve, Paul, because I had no idea about the second one. I'd seen the Basque 37 shirt that Newport County had launched this summer, and it's such a, again, not just a beautiful football shirt, but also a very powerful story as well, and again, intrinsically linking the the Celtic nations of Wales and the Basque Country, or Euskadi as it's known in the language. I've probably butchered that, so I do apologise. They were incidentally the next team or the next area we wanted to talk about, that Euskadi team, and sort of wanting to focus on why did they tour abroad, what did their story represent, and to learn a bit more about them, because that is an identity that still lives on to this day.
Just a correction there, Basque Country is not a Celtic nation. I think if you're thinking of Galicia, which is the northwest, but yeah, the Basque Country is totally unrelated to anyone else in Europe, as far as we know. It's
entirely unique.
Fascinating area, place. But yes, I mean, the Basque Country and Wales have the two of the oldest languages in Western Europe that still survive. And I think where a lot of the similarity come from is obviously they're not just having red, white, and green flags, but also the fact they've had the same challenges of having a larger neighbour imposing its language on them, and yet still kind of retaining that sort of elements of the language and the culture, etc. So although the experience is very different. But there were 4,000 children came to Britain. They were spread throughout the country. You'll find plaques in up the northeast and various other places, and Southampton, where they docked. But just on the Euskadi national side, there's been a national side for more than a century, in some form or other. What happened during the Civil War is when Franco and the nationalists were sort of closing in, they put a team together and said, right, we're going to go and raise awareness and raise some funds for the cause as well. And so this was basically a sporting embassy, Embajadora Deportiva, as it was known. And they're effectively going off, and they were literally playing in the red, white, and green of the Ikurriña, which is the Basque flag, which is based on the Union Jack, Union flag. So if anyone sees it, you recognise it as red, white, and green. And I think they're in France. They do very well, actually. They're brilliantly successful. They're beating Racing Club of Paris at the Parc des Princes 3-0, and then they learn that Guernica has been bombed. Those who are not familiar with Guernica, it's not the first, because they've been other bombings like such Durango down the road, but it was the most famous of that era. Aerial bombardments happened on Market Day. It was basically Spanish Civil War in many ways was the Axis powers like Germany, Italy, and even the Soviet Union, who were on the Republican side, testing their tactics and for the upcoming bigger wider European theatre of war that would follow. So this is the first sort of systematic aerial bombardment was going on in the Basque Country that we'd ever seen in Europe. While they were on tour anyway, so they got to sort of tell the story of what was happening there. When they go to the USSR, I think they play 9 games, they only lose 1, but then they hear that Bilbao has fallen while they're over there. They do a spell in Scandinavia, they realise they can't really go back, although 1 or 2 players did eventually, but the rest of them, they all head off to Mexico. and they play in the amateur top flight league. They are as Club Deportivo Euskadi in the 38-39 season, and also in the sort of metropolitan league around Mexico City as well. But it's amateur at the minute. It's amateur in Mexico. But many of them never came back, sort of just ended up dispersed throughout Latin American football leagues.
Yeah, absolutely, and Guernica as well, immortalised by the exile that was Pablo Picasso, which sort of links in with this side as well, and what they went to do. I know there is there a personal link or affection to the Newport County element or the shirt that they've done, Chris? Because I know that you've publicised that sort of conversation and really focused on that story.
No, I haven't personally, but I'm just delighted to hear, that people celebrating their, past connections. Even though I think it's Killion, which is the town. Some of the I think it's about 52. I think of the 4,000 kids went there, so it's a small proportion, but it's still, there's been, it's nice to see it celebrated and marked. And by the way, just as a final ironic segue about that, the reason they're wearing Athletic colours is Athletic got their colours from Southampton originally. And it's ironic that obviously the Southampton Bilbao connection with the children on the boat as well. So there are Sunderland fans that will dispute the origins of the Athletic Club shirt. So I'm not going to go into too much about that, but it's coming like a bit of full circleism with that as well.
Yeah, I think we can all agree it's a beautiful shirt as well, isn't it, Paul?
Absolutely, yeah. I would be tempted to buy one if my wife would allow me to have another football shirt in the house, but she tells me I've got too many already. So.
Mine too. But yeah, I want to move maybe on to Franco's club is how I'm going to describe it here, and we've got it within the agenda as Real Madrid. There's a famous quote, isn't there, Paul, by Sir Alex Ferguson, and I know how much of a fan of this man you are, so I'll let you maybe reiterate that quote that he said back in 2008.
Well, he was. I think he was having a bit of a sulk on in an interview with one of the magazines. Was it GQ? I think on 2008, United had just sold Ronaldo lost Ronaldo to Real Madrid during the was it the second or third Galactico summer, depending on where you want to draw the line. And yeah, he referred to them as Franco's club rather bitterly. I think may have been tongue in cheek. You can always maybe miss some sort of point if it's in written format, but I think it was probably a little bit bitter, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so we have to have nuance always when we're dealing with something, an institution like Real Madrid. And I mean, he was a fan. It sounds like he knew, unlike other dictators like Mussolini, for example, Adolf Hitler. Franco actually liked football. So he knew about it. He also played La Quiniela, which is the pools, allegedly. So he, followed the game. So he was aware of the power of the sport. And we're going to talk about what he did with the national team soon. Anyway, but with Real Madrid, I just think we need to have a lot of nuance, because if we kind of dial back to 1939, the nationalists have won the Civil War. The Spanish country is kind of basically one big prison camp. Effectively, it's but if you go, back even further before that, as I mentioned, the guy who was the president at the outbreak of the war is a guy called Rafael Sanchez Guerra. He could have gone to Valencia with the rest of the government. He doesn't. He stays with Madrid at their Chamartín Stadium. It's pretty much dismantled to help defense of Madrid. Madrid is being pummeled from all sides at this point. If anyone's familiar with the song, If You Tolerate This, Then Your Children Will Be Next by Manic Street Preachers, that's inspired by a poster which has got a dead girl on it with some sort of bombers behind her, and that's basically because Madrid was getting kind of pummeled, so they needed all this defense, and that's effectively what happened to Madrid Stadium. So he eventually does go into exile in France, joins the sort of Republican government in exile, whereas one of his deputies, a guy called Antonio Dega, he was a massive communist. He is executed at the end of the war. None of the Madrid football team is killed during the fighting. Their goalkeeper, Ricardo Zamora, who's a famous goalkeeper, he actually, came close to being executed when he was a prisoner of the Republic, because he'd expressed nationalist views, but he had, because they saw who he was, so people wanted to play football with him just because they said they played football with Ricardo Zamora. So when Franco wins the Civil War, Real Madrid actually don't win the league until 53, 54, I think it is. So it's like 14 years later. It's Athletic, well, it's now Atletico Madrid. They were a mixture of Athletic de Madrid, the sister club Atletico Club de Bilbao, but in Madrid, hence the red and white stripes, and a club called of the Air Force called Atletico Aviación, so aviation athletic basically, and they obviously had the blue. So this is where the merge comes in, and you get the current sort of Atletico Madrid kit, and they were made to Hispaniциze their name. So they win the first league under Ricardo Zamora, funny enough, in 1940, first post-war league. And Madrid are nowhere; they're just being rebuilt by Santiago Bernabeu, who I mentioned before. He was a nationalist during the war, expressed national support, but it wasn't like as if Madrid itself was itself a nationalist outfit. Every club had eventually got Falange was a Franco's party, had a representative on each board, so they could basically keep an eye on everyone. There is one famous incident in 1943, Copa del Generalissimo, I really struggle to say that word, where famously Madrid beat Barca 11-1. And allegedly it was meant to be some kind of Falange's pressure, coming into the changing room and things like that. And likewise, you get rumours around the signing of Alfredo Di Stefano. But they didn't win the league till 1953-54, as I mentioned. And if you think about where European football is at this stage, Santiago Bernabeu has built a new stadium for them. So they've got the foundations of what you need to be a successful club. They'd only won the league twice, by the way, before the war. They're between them, Barca and Athletic Club, it was pretty much, a 3-horse race. However, European football comes along in 55, 56, whatever it is, the first European Cups comes along, and obviously Madrid win the first 5. So they were in the right place at the right time in many ways to take advantage of the internationalization of the sport. As obviously Franco is a politician, so he understands how to, maximize this potential as a propaganda thing. But it wasn't like they won. If you look at the leagues, they didn't completely dominate the Spanish league, the same way, say, Dinamo Berlin did with 10 successive titles as the Stasi team in Berlin in the 80s, So it's not like that at all. So I think you have to be really nuanced. I think it's quite easy to associate Madrid as the club of the capital, of the centre politically, and it has, if it has a political identity, it has moved with that, as we mentioned. So Sanchez Guerra and the fact that it was a Republican before the war, then it became, Bernabeu himself, the president, is, support the nationalist cause. And then after the war, what is it? I don't know, it's kind of like a commercial entity now, isn't it? I mean, it's very, very difficult to stereotype and nuance. And I think fat opposition fans like to do it. There's a famous chance that the other team singing Equipo del Gobierno now, but went through the país, the team of the government, the shame of the nation, the embarrassment of the nation. And I think it's not really, because they've won how many 14 Champions League or something. They are the most famous club, most successful club in the world. So I think there's an element of envy that goes into the criticism of Real Madrid.
Yeah, and it's probably a lot to do with Franco's, I don't want to say obsession, but his strategy is probably the word to use, and instilling Castilian values and trying to implement, the ideals of Castilian across the entire nation. And I think maybe we could say that, Real Madrid have been unfairly characterized as Franco's team as maybe part of that effect, wouldn't it? Especially in rivalry with, the Catalan side of Barcelona.
Well, I think ironically, he rather liked Athletic Club's policy of La Cantera, which was obviously, as you know, is a lot of your listeners will know, is fielding only basketball players or with a connection. I think the rules were tighter in those days, but that was, I think he kind of liked that element of it, keeping it sort of as kind of a nationally pure, as he'd probably call it, as anything else. But like I said, they did. Demand some unity across the nation. But places like Athletic Club and the new camp. These are places where you could speak your language without getting arrested, because no one's going to arrest 60,000 people at San Mames or 90,000 people at Camp Nou either. So,
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think just conscious of the fact that we could spend all day talking about the two most famous clubs, and we don't want to ignore any others. So if we talk about how some of the other clubs were impacted by the war, we've touched on Atleti and particularly you mentioned about the merge between them and how that reshaped the club. I think it would be maybe if we touch on the likes of Real Oviedo and Osasuna, two clubs that also suffered quite significantly as a result or during the Civil War. You mentioned obviously Oviedo in the Defiant, and I think it's fair to tell people that the story of how they effectively missed their first season in the top flight as a result of
they did. Their ground was kind of destroyed, and they needed next year to rebuild it. And this is where Osasuna comes in, because they had to play a playoff with Atletico Aviación, as they were known, to take Oviedo's place in the top flight in the new season. And obviously they lost to Atletico Aviación, who went on to be to win the title anyway in the following year. So yeah, it was bad time for them. I mean, what had happened during the Civil War is that the league had been ceased. Football had been ceased everywhere apart from the East Coast, which was Republican held. So they had a Liga Mediterránea, which was the Mediterranean League, as you imagine, 4 Catalan teams, 4 Valencian teams. And as I mentioned, Barcelona won that league, but then disappeared off to like the Euskadi team, they disappeared off to Mexico, famously, under Patrick O'Connell, the Irishman who saved FC Barcelona. And then Levante won the Copa the Free Spain Cup, as I mentioned. But then, some of the other clubs just got massively hit. So Osasuna, which means health in Basque, by the way, if anyone's interested, a little factoid there. There's an interesting case of one of their former players called Andrés Hasselgarde, who I cover in the book, who was offloaded to Sporting de Gijón, but he was killed in an airstrike, actually, an air raid, and no one ever found his body, so they've been looking for him ever since. I spoke to a guy who actually interviewed his family about what he was like as a player and all that sort of thing. Osasuna's board were mostly left-leaning. A lot of them ended up, unfortunately, being executed. As a number of, the players. Here's the thing: Osasuna playing red, and one of the themes that came out in this chapter is that the nationalists are incredibly petty about the color red because it's associated with communism. So they burn Osasuna shirts when they raid this player's house, and then when Spain revert to blue during this period until the late 40s, actually. And when they play Portugal in the sort of unofficial friendly during the Spanish Civil War, it's about 38, I think it is, in Vigo. I think Portugal, because they're under the Salazar dictatorship, which is also fascist at the time, they play in blue and white, I think it is, or white shirts, blue shorts. And Spain are in playing a blue. So they refuse to wear red. It's wonderfully petty in many ways.
I think I've read in, I think it was Pasion, Miguel Pereira's book. Osasuna suffered more than any other club in terms of the number of employees that perished during the war. I may have miscredited that. I'm fairly certain it was Miguel's book. I think it'd be worth us looking post-war now, because obviously we've touched on quite a bit during the Civil War, but I think there's obviously so much we could get to, and it's a very broad time span as well, isn't it? Could you maybe give us some background then about after the war, how Spain went about the rebuilding, or how the regime went about rebuilding?
So going into the, as I mentioned before, how the league cooked off again. There was a lot of players kind of all over the place. Some went, were abroad. Some were kind of pardoned and allowed to play again. Some, obviously, Euskadi, a couple of them came back. Some were even of the Basque children. I think about 6 ended up playing professional football in England, and 2 of them ended up playing at the Athletic Club. So everything comes back together now. What happens in the 50s, as I mentioned before, Spain is kind of in the 40s, obviously, because it was neutral in World War II. But it's obviously the association, the fact that it's sided with the Axis, means that it's kind of ostracized from the international community for a while. However, in the 1950s, it starts to open up. The US see the value of having air bases in Spain. In 1950, Spain beat England and Brazil in the World Cup, effectively eliminating England, and Franco uses this as great propaganda. And obviously in 1960 he then refuses to let the Spanish national side play the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union are communist, and kind of was worried that if they'd lose, that would be seen as a defeat. However, in 1964 they host it and they win the European Championship, playing the Soviet Union, and he sees this very much as the sort of continuation of the Civil War, and as a justification for beating communism. So this is what's happening at this point. And obviously these, at the same time, there's more tourism coming into the money, there's more into the country, there's more people are becoming more aware of Spain, but also under this kind of undercurrent is going on. There's a bit of terrorism coming along from ETA, for example, the Euskadi Taskatasuna, which is the Basque separatist group. They start getting active and they kill his successor, his appointed successor in 1973. And you get into sort of the late Franco period, where I think you spoke about this, mentioned this recently with Brendan Madden, you had on, didn't you?
Yes.
About his Once Upon a Time in the League, and he mentions the black armband situation. So I won't go on about that again, but people who listen to that, basically it did show what was happening, and his regime as he was dying was sort of losing control and didn't have a succession plan really now. And then it's a very, very tentative period when he dies in 1975, November 75, and Spain returns to very fragile democracy the next few years. Now, what happens during that period is every single regional flag in Spain is recognized. So the regions are starting to sort of say, "Oh, I would like some autonomy, thank you very much." So you can see the decentralization of power. However, one exception is the Basque country, because they see the Ikurriña, which I mentioned before, the Basque flag, as a separatist symbol. So you can see it's all about symbols and flags, and nothing ever changes. And so basically, there's a wonderful incident in the 5th of December 1976, where in the Basque derby at Atocha Stadium, it's home of Real Sociedad, and they are playing Athletic Club de Bilbao. And what's happened before that is a player called Jose Antonio de la Hoz Uranga, who is a midfielder for Athletic Club. He convinces his sister to sew this outlawed flag, and he smuggles it into the ground. And with the permission of all the players and staff, the two captains, so that's Jose Angel Iribar of Athletic Club and Ignacio Cortabarria of Real Sociedad, La Real, come onto the pitch holding this famous photograph of it. In fact, it's on the front, I think, of Once Upon a Time in La Liga, holding the flag, and they lay it in the centre circle, and the whole, obviously there's an eruption of, cheering from the Basque crowds. But what's the police going to do? That's the key thing, and so it's there is no response. They don't know quite what to do, because it's so ambiguous at this moment. And that's seen as a key legitimizing moment for the Basque flag. It's when it's sort of reintegrated, effectively legitimized. And if you think about it, it's a massive moment in Basque history, not even football history, but Basque history in general, about how it gains acceptance within the Spanish state, which is still part of. I don't, have to be careful when describing it as Spain, because some people get annoyed. So it is within the Spanish, state. So, it's just a fascinating kind of period, really. At the end of Franco's life, even after him, as I mentioned, you still got, far right elements of various clubs and a bit of nostalgia for him. And, you'd see weird rallies on his birthday and stuff going through Madrid with, flags and, press kits. So it's kind of, Spain, I think, is a highly politicized country regionally, and that is played out through football, and certainly some more than others. So it's something that we have to be mindful of. It's a long time ago now, but when I lived there, it was very raw. So I think it kind of still is raw, still surfaces from time to time, doesn't it? But Spain is a very modern democracy now, kind of mature democracy, and far more equal society now than back in those days.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's funny how, obviously, joke there about flags and symbols, but it's very interesting to think that to go back to the Ikurriña and it being brought out by the Sociedad and Athletic Club captains. It's an iconic moment, but it's strange to think that is going to be 49 years ago today, this this December, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which it's quite a milestone for it, really. But you're right in saying that there's a period of uncertainty and tension that carries on even up to the '82 World Cup. There's still an undercurrent, which I know it's perhaps outside of the scope really of Defiant, but it strikes me as like there's definitely a book there about the '82 World Cup that nobody's written yet. I think
there's a book on the '82 World Cup. I don't know if I think it's more general about what happened rather than there being the Spanish perspective. But it's a weird thing because back when I was younger, and I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, Spain were always perennial dark horses and underachievers. I quite like them that way. They've been winning too much recently. But,
it's always interesting
style then as well, though, didn't they?
Yeah, it's always interesting as well. I found in the 1982 World Cup that it was awarded whilst Franco was still alive, I believe, and he saw this as a massive opportunity to put Spain onto the world stage, and has those parallels with maybe the Olympics back in 1936, for example. I also find it quite an interesting parallel that we spoke a lot about how Franco used football as a propaganda tool to promote certain agendas. But as we were just discussing with the flags at the between La Real and Athletic Club, the black armbands that we discussed, it was also a huge tool in the transition to democracy and ultimately away from Franquism as well. So it's interesting to understand the legacy of how football fits with Franquism and how we see it right now, as you've said, with that particular nuance.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think basically it's always an undercurrent. I think basically a bit like with flags in a lot of countries, I think you can draw a lot by someone saying whether they support. But basically, you know what it's like in Spain. You have your local club perhaps, and then there'll be one of the big two that you would support. I'd rather they won. That isn't always a political decision, but for some people it is. So it's, I think very much that will reflect your politics. But I think that conversation becomes even harder when you think about how far, two things. One, how far we are from that era, how relevant is it still? And also the fact that these two clubs are basically commercial rivals as much as anything now. So you think a lot of international tourists at the Camp Nou when it reopens, like I said, far less Catalan players from La Masia or whatever it happens to be. So it's kind of how authentic is that argument that they are the flag bearer for the nation, so to speak, when it's I know there was that referendum, wasn't there? I don't know what the conversation is around about that nowadays. You probably have to speak to a local about that. But just as an outside observer, that's all. I'm just thinking it's not quite the same conversation. I think almost forced identity, trying to sort of like invoke a sort of an argument that maybe isn't there. I don't know.
I think I think you're right about that, and it's a perfectly good observation to point out now that's quite telling more of modern football than anything else. If you go back to, I don't know, if you think maybe 2010, so the World Cup win, obviously there was that Catalan core that were made mostly the spine of the team, but then obviously you had Sergio Ramos and you had Madrid players a part of it, and that was almost like I don't know if it's fair for me to say this, but as an outsider looking in and everything, a long-time follower of Spanish football, it felt like that was in a way a bit of a unifying moment for the nation of nations, in the sense that all these regions of, like you say, 17 of them have got very rich and proud cultures of their own. But we've seen in the decade or so since, 15 years has gone very, very fast. We've seen the change between it having that rivalry of Barcelona very much representing, as you say, the political side and the Catalan side, and Real Madrid as being that more. I think Real Madrid have always kind of seen more of a commercial brand anyway, but not as in light years ahead of Barcelona. Just that they have had a different approach to the game, whereas it does feel very much like the perhaps more closely aligned to one another now. In this, maybe it's a post-COVID thing. It's definitely a commercial decision rather than a football decision. And to go full circle to what we we touched on at the start of this conversation as well, is that is probably what is drawing people back to some of the smaller clubs in the respective regions. There's a lot to be said, though, about Spanish football at the moment, where it needs to reconsider how it markets itself with the television rights this season. It's caused quite an uproar and stuff. With,
I think it'll always be obviously as the number one sport in Spain, it will always be the flag bearer for whomever they are, even whether it's the name, for example, Celta de Vigo, that's still more or less saying Celtic. Likewise, they're up the road, Deportivo La Coruña, Depor their away kit is usually the flag of Galicia, which is the white with a red, light blue to the diagonal.
Yes.
Top right to bottom, sort of top left to bottom right, which has had the hymn in there before as well at one point. So, they are stamping their identity, flying the flag for their region when they go onto the football pitch, and that helps their people identify with them. Like I said, Osasuna is one of the few that's not got a geographical name attached to it. So, it means health. So, they're kind of, even though they're in Navarra, which is the neighboring region, they are kind of spiritually and linguistically Basque, if not physically Basque, in terms of, so they kind of they kind of invoke that their Basque identity with a Navarrese kind of perspective. So, it's football always reflect, the regions in Spain. I think it's always going to be their sort of flag bearer. My only frustration with Spanish football is I wish it was a bit more varied at the top level. I think we all wish that.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's been an amazing chat. Thanks, Chris. It's been so insightful and so interesting to talk about an era of football that, possibly due to the Pact of Silence, doesn't get spoken about a lot until very, very recently, like you say, 50 years since. So I do thank you for your time, and people should go and read Defiant. It's an absolutely incredible book on the history of football against fascism. It's just over everyone's shoulder. I haven't got a copy to hand, I'm afraid, to make the trifecta. I did want to mention very quickly your newest book, Shades of Green, which has taken the year by storm. Paul, I know you've got some Irish background. I myself am a Derry City fan for my sins, or at least a lover of. Obviously, the only Northern Irish or North of Ireland side that play in the Republic of Ireland League. Is there any wise words you want to share with us, why we should go and have a look at Shades of Green and the stories that have taken us there?
Yes, read the book and then go to do a big ground hop around the whole island, because it's very underrated, and it's having a moment. Well, League of Ireland's having a moment, I should say. So it's quite hard now to get into a lot of grounds, but there's some brilliant atmospheres. They've all got ultra groups now, so it's an exciting place to be right now. And the quality's not bad, actually. Expect League 1 or 2 level. It's a lot of the better players are staying at home. Irish League in the north of Ireland is slightly different. It's a bit more like what you'd expect, kind of over here in terms of noise and atmosphere, but the grounds are absolutely out of this world. There's some wonderful gems like the Oval in Belfast, home of Glentoran, Dundella's little Wilga Park, which is so small and slopey and wobbly, and it's wonderful. Cliftonville's Solitude Ground is the oldest ground in Ireland, and it's can't go in half the main stand, so it's just like, it's properly old school over there. You should go check it out.
Absolutely. Have you got an Irish team, Paul? Have you ever thought of one? Or can I introduce you to one?
Well, my family are from Galway, so Galway is my team. So
fair enough. And have you been to a game there?
I've not made it to a game. No, it's on the to-do list. I'm more inclined to go to a GA game than a soccer game, so to speak.
Fair enough.
But yes, it's on the to-do list.
And I can't speak highly enough of Brandywell as a destination as well. And certainly around the improvements around the club as well. So I echo everything you've just said there, Chris. It's been absolutely fantastic. We'll wrap up there if that's okay. This has been absolutely amazing, Chris. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Is there anything in the pipeline that we should keep an eye out for? We always like to give a little signpost, or are you going to take a well-earned rest for the rest of the year?
Well, actually, my stuff. So I had a technical issue with the blog, actually. So I basically ended up shutting it down because it was losing traffic anyway due to various search engine algorithm things nowadays. But all my written work's now going to be on Substack. So just look for Outside Right on Substack. It's free at the moment. I'm not going to charge until I get a decent following. The podcast is out weekly at the moment, every Sunday. I've got some great guests coming up, mostly looking at Latin America recently, but got some, some few other European-based one coming up. Then follow me on social, just look for Outside Right. And I haven't got any books in the pipeline, but if I were to do one, the next one would be about Spain.
Oh, it sounds absolutely perfect. It sounds like we need to get you back, Chris.
Maybe 3 years or so.
Oh, that sounds absolutely perfect. Paul, once again, I'm going to say a massive thank you for spending your Thursday evening with me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure for me to sit and listen to Chris, and obviously to see you, Nick, as well. It's a weekly occurrence for me, isn't it? Novelty's wore off a bit for that now, but it's great to speak to Chris today. I very much appreciate you giving your time.
Well, thank you, guys, and keep up the good work.
Absolutely perfect. And thank you once again. If everyone listening at home, do go and give us a follow on social media. Keep an eye out on our Patreon as well. There's some exciting stuff happening there too. New ventures, new ideas, something that me and Paul are putting together. So all will be revealed. And yes, we'll see you next time on El Partido. Hasta luego.